it. And also, we're here for the revised transportation and disposal plan, and I have to thank you all because we received, after the first presentation of the plan, over 100 unique public comments that helped GE and EPA prepare and put together this revised plan. It's been posted for about 2 months now, and the public comment period will end January 15th, so there's still time if you want to include any additional public comments. The public comments are incredibly helpful to us, and we appreciate you taking the time to be here and taking the time to provide public comment. We currently have like 9 different documents that are open to public comment. So I would invite you all to pick up these sheets because we also have upcoming opportunities. There's an awful lot going on, and it is hard to keep up with. But if you pick up the handouts that we have outside, they provide all the information you need to know to access the documents and to submit public comments on them. My name's Joanne Kittrell. I'm sorry, I should have started with that. I'm a public affairs specialist for EPA, and I have the GE team is here, as well as EPA's team. Matt Calicone is going to be presenting the revised plan for you all tonight. And when we're done, we'll take questions after the presentation is complete. We're just here tonight to talk about this plan. So it would be most helpful if everybody just, when they stand up and want to make public comments, keep in mind that we are here tonight to discuss the transportation and disposal plan. We can provide other opportunities, discuss other things if you like, but tonight it'd be most helpful if we stick to the script, if you will. So Matt, if you're ready, thank you.
Try to use this microphone so I can point at things at the presentation. And thanks, Joanne, for the introduction. Like she said, my name is Matt Calicone. I'm a project manager for GE. I'm going to present on GE's revised transportation and disposal plan. You can go to the next slide, Ashley. So I'll provide an overview, and we'll review the agenda of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to review the transportation and disposal requirements for remediation. We'll talk about the various river reaches, estimated removal volumes and schedule. We'll talk about the modes of transportation that GE evaluated. We'll talk about transportation scenarios, GE's conclusion and proposed scenario, and we'll talk about truck routes, quality of life considerations, and we'll summarize at the end. Okay, here's an overview. I'm starting at the beginning, which is a great place to start. GE has performed a thorough evaluation of the various modes of transportation, and we selected an approach that maximizes the use of hydraulic transport. That's 79% of the project material from the rest of river will be transported hydraulically without the use of trucks. That's an increase from the prior plan of about 57%. Our approach maximizes the use of rail transport for both on-site and off-site disposal. 17% of the project materials will be transported by rail combined with truck, and we'll talk about what that means in future slides. We're minimizing the use of trucking alone, with only 4% of the project materials transported solely by truck. This approach results in the fewest local round-trip truck miles for all the alternatives that we evaluated, and we'll definitely go into those details in the future slides. Next, we'll review the transportation and disposal requirements that were included in EPA's 2020 RCRA permit. The permit requires a hybrid disposal approach for moving and dealing with excavated soil and sediment. That means material that meets specific low-level concentrations will be placed at the UDF, the Upland Disposal Facility, and materials that don't meet the UDF criteria must be sent off-site for disposal, with a minimum of 100,000 yards going off-site. The RCRA permit also requires GE to maximize the transport of waste material to off-site facilities using rail. And GE has undertaken this evaluation looking at potential use of rail for both the UDF and for off-site disposals. We're also looking at maximizing hydraulic transport, which is evaluated significantly in this plan. Here's a brief overview of the river reaches. Some of you may have seen some of these slides before that talk about the map and the overall schedule for the project. You can see the remediation will start in Reach 5A at the top of the screen, and the first 10 years of the project will include Reach 5A, 5B, 5C, and Reach 6 down to Woods Pond. After Woods Pond, and the other reaches are remediated, 10 plus years into the project, we'll remediate Reaches 7 and 8 down to Rising Pond. This is a table that shows the volume of material that is anticipated to be handled during the remediation. You can see on the left side, each of the reaches is listed individually. And you'll see the next column over shows the estimated removal volume per reach. Those total to about just over 1 million cubic yards of material, that's sediment and soil, to be removed from the river system and handled. Of those million yards, how does that break down? About 960,000 yards are scheduled for on-site disposal at the UDF, with a minimum of 100,000 yards going off-site, like I mentioned before. Next, we're going to talk about the modes of transportation. We have 1 million yards. How do we move it? How do we get it to where we need it to go? The modes that GE evaluated were hydraulic transport, truck transport, and what we call rail truck transport. There is no scenario in which the use of only rail will work for the rest of river remediation, and we'll talk more about that in the future slides. So what is hydraulic transport? Hydraulic dredges remove sediment as a slurry by dislodging the sediment, combining it with water, and pumping it through pipes. This process involves a relatively large amount of use of water to create a slurry for the sediment. You can see this is a typical dredge vessel here with the dredging device at the front of the vessel, where it will suck the sediment from the bottom of the river system, go through the vessel and into a floating pipeline to a land-based facility where it's pumped further to where it's going. The lower picture is an example of what one of those pumping stations looks like. The sediment will move in this pipe, the slurry will move in this pipe and be pumped to its next destination. For this project, 79% of the material to be removed from the river system will be transported hydraulically with no trucks. That includes 74% of the project materials being hydraulically transported directly to the UDF, and an additional 5% from reaches 7G and 8 being transported hydraulically to the Rising Pond loading area where it will be transported off-site by rail. 79%, no trucks. What do we do with the remaining 21% of the material that needs to be handled? That material will require either truck or a combination of rail and truck to be handled. This is a substantial increase in hydraulic transport as compared to the 2023 plan, which showed about 57% material could be removed hydraulically and 43% by truck. What is truck transport? Everyone's probably familiar with trucking. We deal with it every day. Trucks are a viable mode of transportation. They allow flexibility easy access to removal and staging areas. We've got some photos here of a truck being loaded with sediment from a remediation project. And this is an example of a truck that could be used to move materials back and forth to where they need to go. Trucking is used on almost all remediation projects extensively throughout the US, including river-related projects that happened in Pittsfield. And finally, what is rail truck transport? Rail is another mode of transportation typically used to move material long distances. Rail transport requires the use of trucks and equipment to move material to and from a rail siding or a rail spur. Now I'll go through these photos to show you what this equipment is. In the top photo, you'll see an excavator loading sediment into what's called an intermodal container. It's a metal box. That metal box is transported by a truck, and it's moved to a rail loading area, either, most likely a rail spur near where the material is being generated. You can see here the container is being transferred from the truck and it's being placed on a rail car. The bottom picture shows a rail car loaded with 6 containers. Once the rail car is loaded at the rail spur, the car will be moved by rail to its next destination, either near the UDF or off-site. So GE evaluated many rail loading and potential rail loading areas, since none exist currently that are near the removal areas for the river. So this evaluation of rail loading areas included 9 previously used rail spurs along the river, and we also evaluated constructing new rail spurs. You can see on the map, hopefully it turned out okay, the 9 areas that we evaluated, including a location in Pittsfield on Industrial Drive. We looked at a location in the UDF property. We looked at a location adjacent to the UDF property. We looked at Columbia Mill, Graylock Mill, a location off Pleasant Street in Lee. We looked at Willow Mill, the Stockbridge train station, and Glendale Dam. We also evaluated constructing new rail spurs in areas that were centrally located and near removal areas. Those rail spurs are circled on this map, and they include Utility Drive, which is near the Pittsfield wastewater treatment plant. What we're calling Woods Pond Spur, which is a rail spur located at the Berkshire Scenic Railway Museum property in Reach 6, Woods Pond. And we evaluated a spur at Rising Pond, constructing a new spur there. That's in the town of Great Barrington. So utilizing the spurs that we think are most feasible to perform this project, we came up with 4 site-wide scenarios that involve a combination of hydraulic transport, truck transport, and what we call rail truck transport. This is to bring material to both the UDF and to off-site disposal facilities. All 4 scenarios involve hydraulic transport. That's key to understand, since 79% of the project material is anticipated to be shipped hydraulically, no trucks. So the 4 scenarios we're going to look at are listed here. I won't go through them in excruciating detail, but we're going to look at specific routes shortly. Scenario 1 is what I call the all trucking scenario. It's basically trucking all material to the UDF and trucking material off-site. Scenario 2 is trucking material to the UDF and then using the all rail truck method for off-site disposal only. Scenario 3 is trucking to the UDF and using mostly rail truck for off-site disposal. And finally, scenario 4 is using mostly rail truck to get to the UDF and all rail truck to get to off-site disposal facilities. For all four scenarios, just like hydraulic is involved in every scenario, trucking is also involved and necessary in every scenario. For example, soil from reaches 5B, 5C, and 6, as well as sediment from reach 7E, cannot be hydraulically transported. There has to be another way to move that material. Trucking these materials directly to the UDF will result in fewer truck miles than getting it to a local rail spur. The anticipated amount of material requiring trucking only is about 4% of the total project volume. These are some more details on each of the scenarios. I'll probably go through these a little quickly because you're probably most interested in the scenario we actually selected. Scenario 1, like I mentioned, is essentially all trucking. Scenario 2, I should take a step back. As I mentioned, all four scenarios involve hydraulic transport. Over 3/4 of material will always be transported hydraulically. But for the remaining material, scenario 1 is all trucking. Scenario 2 is trucking and the use of rail truck at 3 of the rail spurs. Scenario 3 is very similar to scenario 2, except we cut back the number of rail spurs and we ship all of the 5A and 5B material by truck. And scenario 4 is hydraulic transport of 79% of the project materials, truck transport of 4% of the project materials, and then for the remaining 17% of material, build and use 3 proposed rail locations. 1 at Utility Drive, 1 at Woods Pond, 1 at Rising Pond, utilizing the rail truck transport method to both the UDF and to off-site disposal facilities. So we evaluated 4 scenarios. What criteria did we use to select the ultimate method to use? We looked at the anticipated volumes generated during the project. We looked at the locations of the removal, obviously spread over 30 miles of river system, and the proximity to the UDF or the state highway system. We also evaluated the total number of truck trips and truck miles involved in each scenario. We evaluated greenhouse gases, worksite and transport injuries and fatalities, quality of life impacts, ecological impacts, logistics and implementation considerations, and obviously the schedule to construct the things we need to do these activities. So how did the evaluation come out? GE's recommended scenario 4 as the site-wide approach to transporting and disposing of the material removed from the rest of the river. This recommendation is based on the preference of some in the community to reduce the number of local truck trips on public roads. Scenario 4 has by far the fewest truck trip miles, over a 260% reduction compared to the other scenario 1 and the other scenarios we evaluated. It is important to note that scenario 4 does rely heavily on the use of the railroad and the railroad schedules. And while we have commitments from them, if their schedules can't meet the production rates or removal volumes from the project, we'll need to supplement the rail truck method with trucking. So now that you know what scenario we are proposing, what does it actually mean? How are we actually going to get the material from one place to another? So we're going to go through each of the reaches. I'll try to do this briefly because there's a lot to look at. So this is reach 5A. This will be the first 5 years of the project. And maybe we'll look at the map first. Obviously, you've got the river here shown. The red boxes that you see near the river, those are staging areas where material has been removed from the river and is temporarily stockpiled. The yellow lines represent temporary construction roads to get from the staging areas out to a public road. And then the purple dash line represents public roads that would be used to get material to Utility Drive, which is the rail loading area for Reach 5A. So what roads will we use? For Reach 5A, we'll use East New Lenox Road, New Lenox Road, a portion of Route 20, Holmes Road, and then ultimately Utility Drive. Once loaded onto a rail car at Utility Drive, the rail car will be moved down to Woods Pond, which is in the figure at the bottom here. Once it's at the Woods Pond rail spur, it still needs to get to the UDF. Here are the routes that we'll take to get from Woods Pond to the UDF. The primary route proposed in the plan is to use Willow Creek Road, Crystal Street, across Schweitzer Bridge, onto Valley Street, which is partially privately owned, and then onto Woodland Road. There is a secondary route that's proposed from Willow Creek Road, down Crystal Street, over the Mill Street Bridge, onto Willow Hill Road, and coming in from the south to get to the UDF. So that was Reach 5A. What about Reach 6? Reach 6 will be in years 3 to 5 after the project starts. Reach 6 is Woods Pond. The great majority of the material for Woods Pond is going to be hydraulically dredged. That means it will be pumped from Woods Pond directly to the UDF. There is a small amount of material, 1 truckload of soil that needs to go to the UDF that's not sediment, and that'll be driven there. And then for material from Woods Pond that needs to go off-site, it will use those same routes. It will be at the UDF, and then it'll use the reverse route back down Woodland Road, Valley Street, over Schweitzer Bridge to Crystal Street, over to the Woods Pond rail spur. Moving down the river from 5A, we've got Reach 5B and 5C. Those are years 6+ from project start. Most of the material from these reaches is for on-site disposal, meaning it's going to the UDF, about 85% from these reaches. It's mostly sediment from Reach 5C. That will be hydraulically pumped to the UDF. Soil, however, that can't be hydraulically pumped from 5C and 5B that needs on-site disposal will have to be driven to the UDF using a portion of East Street, New Lenox Road, Roaring Brook Road, and then ultimately onto Woodland Road and the UDF. Material for off-site disposal is similar to Reach 6. If it's at the UDF, it will follow the reverse and get over to Woods Pond Spur, or it could be driven directly to Woods Pond Spur using these routes over the Schweitzer Bridge route. And here's reaches 7B, 7C, and 7E, 10+ years into the project. Reaches 7B and 7C, which is all on-site disposal going to the UDF. Those locations are close enough to the UDF where that material can be hydraulically transported there, no trucks. Material from Reach 7E, we're now down at Willow Mill Dam. That's also for on-site disposal. There's a small volume of material here that will need to be trucked. The routes used will be Route 102, Route 7, out to Route 20, onto Walker Street, then to Mill Street, Willow Hill, and Woodland Road. And then finally, reaches 7G and 8 at Rising Pond, 10+ years into the project. Sediment from 7G and Reach 8 will be hydraulically transported to the Rising Pond loading area, where it will be dewatered, Sediment from Reach 7G, a small amount, will also need to be transported to the rising pond loading area using these roads because it can't be hydraulically pumped. Glendale Middle Road, out to Route 183, down to Front Street, and Van Duzenville Road. Once material is at the rising pond rail loading area, it can be transported up to Woods Pond and follow the routes that we talked about to get to the UDF. Quality of life. The quality of life standards that apply to all the remediation activities that happen at the site also apply to the transportation and disposal plan. The transport of material will be performed by trained and licensed haulers familiar with how to respond to emergencies. The trucks and rail containers will be certified and inspected. They'll be lined and covered, and they'll undergo safety checks and appropriate labeling. We're going to implement traffic control BMPs by using additional signage or flaggers as needed. And we'll be implementing measures to mitigate traffic roadway infrastructure impacts, meaning we're going to evaluate the roads that are to be used for reconditioning or upgrading, and we're also going to monitor those roads before, during, and after the remediation to assess any impacts to the roads. Also, all of the work will be conducted under EPA oversight. Summary. The transportation approach selected by GE maximizes the use of hydraulic transport to the UDF. It maximizes the use of rail transport for on-site and off-site disposal. Scenario 4 results in the fewest local round-trip truck miles for all the evaluations that we considered. The T&D plan is currently open for public comment, as Joanne indicated. The comment period ends January 15th. And if there's any updates to the plan after EPA approves it, those updates will be included in the final work plans for each of the river reaches. And those updates will include the final methods for disposal, the final routes to be used, and the final off-site disposal facilities that'll be selected. That's an overview of the T&D plan. And I'm going to turn it back over to EPA.
Matt, appreciate that and set that there. So before we start the question and answer any questions you guys might have, I'm going to grab this other mic. We have, in addition to Matt, we have our project managers here. Dean is down here, Josh Fontaine, and Alex Carly Dorsey, and our site attorney is also here. I have sad news for us, not for Ashland, but your community involvement coordinator, Ashland Brooks, has accepted a position with Region 8, EPA Region 8, and so end of December she will move on, she'll move west. But Lauren Draper, if you could let everybody know who you are. She'll be the person that you can reach out to if you have any questions or need information, and pick up those papers that we left out front because they have all the contact information that you need to get a hold of Lauren moving forward. So again, like I mentioned, we want to keep this about this presentation. The Transportation and Disposal Plan, it's a huge document. This is a summary. As I mentioned, you have until January 15th to submit any public comments, and they are precious, and we encourage you to do so. And at this point, if anybody has a question they'd like to ask, I would invite you to please come up.
First of all, I want to thank Mr. Taliaferra and the Region 1 team for the EPA for listening to the input from the communities after the original transportation disposal plan last fall, and recognizing that that plan was inadequate and was not in the best interest of our communities, and for having directed GE to do a better job. When I review this plan as presented here, I see, from my point of view as medical director of the Tri-Town Health Department, that this is much improved compared with last year. So I thank you for that. I see that the trucking through our towns has been considerably diminished. And that's a real accomplishment for us. I also see that there are several new aspects in this plan that we didn't have at all last year. First of all, we were brought to understand by the plan last year that there were no available staging sites for rail and that it couldn't be used. And we now see that rail can be used at multiple sites, not only for transportation to the local UDF, but also transportation out of county, which was actually one of the original plans of the region, as I understand. Now, another very new aspect to this is the introduction of hydraulic dredging and transport from multiple regions, rather than just from 5C and Woods Pond, as was originally anticipated. I see that this is another major new contribution. However, as medical director, I have to say that I still have a very significant concern. And that concern is the long duration of this project. And I can't help but say that when I step back and look at this, from my point of view, knowing from what the region has told me that delaying the excavations and removal is a prolongation of the risk for the communities downstream, that this project does not seem, this transportation disposal plan does not seem to be driven by the idea that the most expeditious transportation and disposal plan should be undertaken, but rather it seems to be driven by the idea that the most waste possible should go to the UDF. Now, I understand that the UDF has been established, and I am not arguing against that. What I am looking at here is what seems to me to be an excess focus on the idea that materials can be taken to the UDF must be taken to the UDF. And I see, when I step back, that the UDF seems to function not only as a delay in the excavation, the ideal excavation plan, but as a bottleneck in the ideal excavation plan. And I'm going to be very specific. However, before I say this, I'd like to put what I'm going to say in context, because I believe in following the principles of the 2020 settlement agreement and the 2020 final permit modification, and including the spirit and what was written in those agreements. I don't want to say or recommend anything against that. But so therefore I'm going to quote from the 2020 final permit. It'll be actually an excerpt, but this excerpt, I think anybody who is familiar with this particular section or chooses to review it will realize that what I'm saying in the excerpt is true to the intent and meaning of that section. So on page 71, section 2.F, adaptive management. An adaptive management approach shall be implemented by the permittee in the conduct of any of the corrective measures, whether specifically referenced in the requirements for the corrective measures or not, to adapt and optimize the project activities to account for lessons learned or new information. Now, we now know that the rail can be used at multiple sites. We now know that hydraulic dredging can be used at multiple sites. This is significant information, and it should trigger a look at Section 2.F and how adaptive management can be used to bring into play the ideal plan, which will expedite things. So, for example, Reach 8, Rising Pond, scheduled to have hydraulic dredging from Glendale Dam and also right from Rising Pond itself, and placed on the rail after dewatering in situ and transported out of county and also to the UDF, is not supposed to start for 10 years after the UDF has been completed. Now, there is no stipulation, I know because I've confirmed with the region, that the excavations have to wait for the UDF to have been completed to receive material. There's no limit. In fact, the region is frequently emphasized, and GE even notes this in its current transportation disposal plan, that the intent should be to maximize the off-site transport of waste material by rail. Why isn't this material in Rising Pond? Now, I've talked to people in different sites around the country, and I understand that hydraulic dredging has been used in multiple sites, and even in the most difficult sites, it takes 6 to 8 months to install and implement the hydraulic dredging and hydraulic transport equipment, and maybe a little longer for large dewatering sites, but the Rising Pond area isn't very large. Why isn't this excavation undertaken immediately before the dump is ready to receive it? It seems to me that the delay is simply due to the fact that the focus is trying to put that small amount of material into the UDF rather than doing what would be most expeditious and safest for our communities, and that is to begin that excavation right away. Now, I'll be done in just a moment.
I was just wondering if you had a question, if you wanted him to answer that, or if you have another question.
I'm posing this now. I have a couple more questions, and you can answer them all together if you don't mind. I think if I put that in context, and I won't take up all of your time. I'll try to be fast. I'm sorry. But I am the medical director of the health department of the 3 towns that this involves. So I think I am entitled to say what I need to say. And I appreciate your time.
We appreciate your comments, and I hope you'll submit them. I just want to make sure we address all the questions you have.
Thank you. I'll make sure that you do too. Thank you. Okay, now, secondly, I understand that one of the rail siting locations that GE looked at was Columbia Mill. And I see a little circle in the diagram of the available space, and it seems as though GE did the same thing that it did last year. It summarily dismissed the Columbia Mill site as a potential rail staging site, saying there was not enough area. Now, I spoke to Housatonic Railroad officials, and they say that there is enough area at the Columbia Mill site if the buildings were to be demolished. I communicated with John Deckraker and Eric Spertus of the Spertus Worldwide company who own the property, and they are extremely willing to cooperate with the region to do whatever is necessary to convert that property into a rail staging and dewatering site. They will demolish the buildings. In fact, Spertus is a demolition company. Housatonic Railroad can even export the material from the demolished dam. Now, that site then, if you use adaptive management, opens up an opportunity. If we had a satisfactory dewatering site there, that dewatering site is within hydraulic transport distance to the UDF Woods Pond area. And if this site can be constructed to do the Reach 7 C and D, I'm sorry if I'm mistaking the exact letters, it could also be used to begin to hydraulically dredge Woods Pond. Now, I understand that it's convenient to put the material from Woods Pond into the UDF, but I've looked at the footprint of the dewatering site in the UDF, and it seems to me that it's a limiting factor for doing everything all at once. And as you know, around the country, there are many instances where multiple excavations are done in a site at the same time. If we had a satisfactory dewatering site at Columbia Mill, we could begin to hydraulically dredge Woods Pond down to Columbia Mill potentially, and let the Woods Pond area, if it is, and I'm just saying if because I recognize that I'm not an expert in this and that you are, but you were so responsive last year to some of the points that I made that I'm hoping you'll be equally responsive this year, that this could then allow the UDF to begin earlier to take out the material from 5C. And at any rate, we'd be getting material out of the river before the UDF was finished, and then with that auxiliary dewatering site and rail site, we could do concurrent excavations even while the UDF was also receiving material, because there's nothing in any of the documents that I've read that says that all of the material or some limited minimum limit must go to the UDF. And so what I'm really asking you is, since we really want to expedite this, why are we doing this sequentially and not using multiple sites at once? Thank you.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you for those comments. And yeah, we did work hard. We took the public's comments into play, and we directed GE, to revise this plan. So there's a lot there, so I'll start. The limiting factor is not the UDF. There are no plans. If the UDF was 100% ready right now, there's no material to bring it there. The plans for the 5 miles in Pittsfield to do the remediation is going to take 2 to 3 years to design, get approved, bid out, and be ready to go. The UDF will be constructed and built before the first bucket of sediment, whether dredged from any of these 10 reaches, will have an approved plan to go. So that is the limiting factor, is the removal of the material. Secondly, the reason we're not starting at Rising Pond is, as with river systems, you start upstream and work downstream, because the contamination is going to continuously flow downstream. That's why we're starting upstream in Pittsfield at 5A. With regard to working 2 projects at once, we did do that. We revised the original plan, which was to start at 5A, 5B, 5C, go directly downstream, and had GE expedite the Woods Pond planning documents. And that planning document, the first phase of that, was just recently submitted. Again, that takes 3 to 4 years to get a final plan. So regardless if you had Columbia Mill, 100 acres, it doesn't matter. There's no material to pump out right now. There just isn't. That's not the critical path. The critical path and the limitations are excavating sediment. I personally directed the 2-mile reach in Pittsfield. 2 miles. Took 4 years. The limitation was not disposal. You're working in a river, you're working in a flowing river in very difficult conditions, upstream to downstream backfilling behind you. There's only so fast you can go, in a coherent and logical way that gets it done safely. The Pittsfield reach is going to take 5 years. You don't hopscotch around the reaches because the contamination is just going to flow in to an area you already excavated. The reason we believe it's appropriate to do Woods Pond, and we will look at other options to expedite it, do Woods Pond concurrent. Woods Pond will happen concurrent to the Pittsfield reach. It'll probably start a year or two later. It's a huge amount of material, 500,000 cubic yards, I think is the latest. That will be dredged, it will not be backfilled. So we're gonna hold up on the backfill of that, the capping, until the upstream 10 miles are remediated, dredged, backfilled, and capped. And then the next step is to cap Woods Pond, so that any residual contamination that moved downstream in the interim will be covered with the final cap. I'm not aware in a river system where you'd start at the tail end, rising pond. That's typically not how it's done. You could do that and not cap it till the end, but there's also only so many projects you can do at once. 2 major construction projects, you know, is challenging enough to monitor and keep safely. But again, all these projects, they're not sitting there ready to be dug up right now. They're all gonna take investigation, sampling, design, engineering, submittals to EPA, public comment, resubmittals to EPA, more public comment, final submittals and approval. So it's probably gonna take 4 to 5 years for, I think there might be 11 different reaches for each of those work plans. So those are some of the reasons why we can't just start digging and sending stuff off-site. As far as the Columbia Mill Dam being a staging area, we can look at that. I don't see how that provides any value on the timeline. The UDF will be done anyway prior to us being anywhere near ready to approve in the Woods Pond plan. So that's not a holdup. If all the buildings were gone at Columbia Mill and there was a massive staging area, great. It does nothing to the timeline because the material is going to be directly pumped into Woods Pond. So that's just not a way to, there might be other ways to speed it up, that's not a way to speed it up. And the other thing is, EPA picked this remedy, not GE. We did a very thorough comparative analysis. We decided the best remedy was on-site disposal. There's other communities, there's other metrics, there's other criteria we had to evaluate. We did not pick all off-site disposal. That's just putting the burden on another community. I understand it's your community, you represent your community. We had a process we went through. We think the appropriate remedy is the 1 million cubic yards in the UDF. I know people don't agree with that, but that's the remedy we picked, that's the remedy we stand by for all the reasons we said in the comparative analysis and the court hearings. So it's got nothing to do with going faster or delaying it. We'll do it as fast as we can. But the speed is dictated by how quickly you can get the work plans approved, how quickly you can get the material out of the river, and and the transportation is not usually the limiting factor. And the disposal is not usually the limiting factor. But that's where we're at with the remedy, and that's the way we're leaning.
Thank you. Sir? Well, can you hold on to your thought? Because I'd love to give this gentleman an opportunity to speak. Hi. Could you also just identify yourself?
I'm William Matthews, a resident of Lee on High Street. And my question is really quite simple compared to what we were just dealing with. And I'm certainly happy to hear that trucking is being minimized in the plans that you're presenting. But I'm wondering why it is that we use hydraulic pumping rather than conveyor belt for moving the material. I just did some calculation here. If we're talking about, I'm referring to your earlier slides, we're talking about 1 million cubic yards and 79% of it being transported hydraulically. That means 790,000 cubic yards. And if it's 90% water, which your earlier slide indicated, we're talking about 1.4 billion gallons of water that is then contaminated, needs to be dewatered, and you have to at least minimize the amount of PCBs in that water before you put it back in the river or wherever it's going. So it seems to me you're actually compounding the problem a little bit by now having all that water to treat. And would it not be better to dredge as carefully as you can without the water, dropping it onto a conveyor belt? What I'm really concerned about is our aquifer. We have an aquifer located just south of Woods Pond. It extends from there over to where East Center Street is located. It's not much compared to aquifers in the world. However, it happens to be Berkshire County's largest aquifer, just because of the geological formation of 90 feet worth of gravel, sand and gravel, right under that area. And I'm very covetous of that aquifer, and it seems to me if we're going to withdraw 1.4 billion gallons, if you went and looked at the river a couple of weeks ago, at what is called Frog's Landing, just below Woods Pond, you could walk through it without getting your feet wet any higher than about the middle of your shins. There was so little water in there. And so I'm very concerned that this plan might also be a plan to tap the aquifer for water as needed in this summer and early autumn months when the river flows just barely until winter rains arrive. And I'm very aware of the fact that we had a kind of a mini drought until last week, and Massachusetts is not immune to droughts. In the 1960s, the Quabbin Reservoir dropped so low that it was barely able to keep its intake operating. And the city of Boston is under some pretty dire water-saving requirements. And so I'd like to minimize the use of water if we can. And most mining operations will transport their material by conveyor belt, not by hydraulic means. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, sir.
Does this work? Yeah. Yeah, so thank you for your question. Yeah, we did not evaluate conveyor belts. I tend to think of conveyor belts as a slightly messy operation with not a lot of good control over the material that you're moving. But your point is well taken on the hydraulic dredging and dealing with the water. That is a trade-off with hydraulic dredging, that you do have to deal with a large amount of water. The benefit, though, of hydraulic dredging is you're moving a lot of material in a short amount of time.
Did you have some clarifications? Yeah. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer. I think I didn't pose my question as clearly as I should have, and I apologize. If you had a rail staging and dewatering site within hydraulic dredging and transport distance from Woods Pond and 5C in addition to the UDF. And you operated that site concurrently with the UDF, and if necessary, transported the material out of county by rail, would you not speed the process up?
I'll go first and I'll let Matt go. I don't think you would. I don't think that's the limitation. Also, if you think about the hydraulic, if you just focus on Woods Pond, hydraulic pumping, that's got to be hydraulically pumped regardless of where it goes. It needs to be hydraulically pumped and dewatered. Instead of double handling it, by far the quickest and simplest is pumping it to the UDF, dewatering it, and that's it. There's no more transport of that material. So if you set up 2 of them and you send 50% to the UDF and 50% to the other one, you know, first of all, you're adding more trucks and more trains and more transport that is totally not needed to send that off-site. That's kind of contrary to a lot of the comments we heard, quite frankly, and it's also contrary to EPA's position that, you know, we don't want to truck low-level PCBs all across the country. So I don't think it would particularly speed it up. Maybe it would incrementally speeding up, but there's zero transportation, truck or rail, for the material pumped from Woods Pond, 5C, behind Eagle Mill and behind Columbia Mill that's going to be placed in the UDF. Correct? There's no trucks, zero. No greenhouse gases from trucks. There's probably from the pumps. Nothing being transported 1,000 miles across the country. Less injuries, less accidents, less carbon footprint, less greenhouse gases. So any incremental increase in production rate, which I think might be minimal, it's number one, it's not really, it may not directly contradict the permit, but it's certainly not what we selected. Like I said, we selected the remedy with the 1 million cubic yards for a reason, for all the other factors that are also in play that we were bound to obligate and we think are appropriate. So Matt, I don't know if you want to add a little more on production.
I think that's right. Yeah, I don't think it changes the production rate, and you're still stuck with the quandary of the going upstream, downstream, and kind of potentially recontaminating areas you're trying to jump ahead and do ahead of time.
Thank you. I also want to just, before I take the next question, let everybody know that these slides, we'll have these up on the website, on EPA's website by Friday, is my thinking. And also, Berkshire Cable is recording this meeting, so if you know folk who have missed it and would like to review it, they'll have it posted on their website as well in a couple of days. Correct, yeah. So, yes. You want the stand? Just hold it.
Thank you very much for this revised plan. My name is Lee Davis. I'm the Vice Chair of the Great Barrington Select Board and the State Representative-elect of the 3rd Berkshire District. So thank you. I want to focus on the remaining, I believe, 21% that is used for truck and rail. And I think that the people that aren't here that are going to be most affected, specifically by the trucks, should have a good sense exactly the roads that are being used. I know you kind of did an overview and you very, very quickly went through the roads involved, but I think especially for those people that are going to be looking at trucks for years, going down potentially in front of their homes and their schools, that they should really get a detailed look at which roads are being impacted specifically, not just an overview, because these are people's homes, these are people's children's. I'm specifically thinking about the folks in Housatonic. I see with the addition of the rail spur there that we seem to still have trucks going down Front Street in Housatonic. Is that correct? So I want a clarification about Housatonic.
Yeah, I don't think it was Front Street. No.
Okay.
We can go back to one of those slides.
So I just want to focus on where the trucks are going to be, and
I could try to answer part of that.
Okay.
I mean, so the roads presented are the roads that we proposed in the plan. The EPA hasn't approved that yet, So we'll have to wait for that approval and any modifications that EPA may require. So these are the roads that are in the plan today. Once we get EPA's approval, we'll know the final, the actual roads, yeah.
So I think it's really important, especially being in a select board meeting yesterday with citizens in Great Barrington, Housatonic, if they were going to be potentially impacted, that we have an ability as select board members to hone in on exactly the roads impacted. And this goes for not just Housatonic, but Lenox, Stockbridge, Lennoxdale, et cetera. I noticed that downtown Stockbridge and downtown Lenox have escaped trucks down the main street. I think in the first plan there were trucks planned, and now downtown Stockbridge and Lenox do not have trucks. However, Main Street in Lee is now a secondary route, so there is a potential that we will see trucks going down Main Street in Lee. So I want that clarification.
I don't think that's true.
It says alternative or secondary route if needed in an emergency.
Correct.
So
yeah, correct.
How is that? I mean, that's who dictates if it's an emergency or the secondary route? So that.
Yeah, it will be EPA. Yeah, it'll have to be a discussion with EPA to use an emergency route. So if there's a major accident on the primary route or a detour or something, we'll have to discuss that with EPA to find the next best possible route to use.
So I guess I'm just curious how it came about that, some towns were completely avoided, main streets, and some were, continuing to be used, and some were slated as secondary. And again, I'm thinking of the residents that, will be given this and saying, hey, you're going to have trucks for 2 years in front of your house. So I really think we owe it to people. And I'm grateful for the slides, but even, I'm trying to figure out exactly the streets. And if there's a way that you can send it to to select boards and to town halls and with, exactly the routes and the times, how many years are we talking? I know in the first transportation plan, you were giving us a very specific amount of trucks, expect X amount of trucks for 2 years down this road. I think that's what the residents really deserve at this point in time, so we can advocate for ourselves, knowing that the deadline is in several weeks. So I do ask for more clarification on that. So thank you. Yeah, and I do want to talk about Rising Pond.
Yeah, next slide, I think it is actually yeah, and so you're correct, Front Street's listed, yeah. So these are, like I said, and I hate to keep repeating it, the project schedule is there, so this is 10 years after the project starts. This is probably a 2 to 3 year duration for Reach 7G and 8. Those are the roads that will be used. From where material at Glendale Dam is being removed, we're getting right out to Glendale Middle Road, getting on 183 Front Street to Van Duzenville. That's what's proposed in the plan. Like I said, it's subject to EPA approval, but that's those are the vehicle routes. Yeah.
So just an example.
Sorry.
So when we're talking.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Right. It's only soil. So that's right.
Let's let everybody else hear what you guys are saying.
Sure.
It would be you could just one example.
Just quickly, so that road that you're talking about being used, Front Street, that's for the soil from the Glendale Dam area. Glendale Dam would be hydraulically pumped, the sediment would be hydraulically pumped, so no trucks. That would be pumped down to Rising Pond.
So it's the
There's a
difference between
small amount of
sediment
floodplain
and soil.
soil
Yeah.
that wouldn't be pumped, that would go into trucks, and it's a few hundred yards. It's not very many trucks that would have to go that way. Like, I don't have the specific number, but on the order of 10 trucks, yeah. Now, over a period of time, it's not gonna be all in one day. It'll be a few trucks a day.
Yeah, 10 trucks total for the whole
Right.
soil from the whole
However
dam.
long it takes to get that soil out.
Yeah.
You good? Anybody else? You want the stand? All right.
So given that PCBs exist in particulate and vapor phase, and it's something that is obviously more common during remediation and something like dredging. I didn't see anything mentioned about how that vapor phase or particles in particular, as the trucks are passing homes and schools daily, how is that being accounted for, especially knowing that long-term, even at low level exposure, and as you've said, this is a 10-year plus project. So I'd just like to know what's been considered to make sure that the community is safe in that way.
Thank you.
I can give you a general overview of the stuff that's in the plan, and then if EPA has anything to add, I'll open it up to them. So, there's mitigation measures, and we talked about some of them. The containers that we're selecting, those intermodal containers, those were specifically evaluated because it's a vessel that will hold the material well. It's got a tight-fitting tarp. It's going to have a plastic liner. It's going to prevent leaks and spills. It's those types of measures to make sure that the material stays in the container and doesn't come out. Those are the measures that we included in the plan. The air monitoring that you spoke of, that will certainly be happening at the locations where the remediation is occurring. I don't know if there's anything else.
I just wanted to clarify, like, more specifically where, like, the dredging is occurring, that kind of stuff, the vapor phase, because I know that there is monitoring for particle phase, or particles or whatever it is, but I did not hear anything about the vapor phase, and I know that's something that has come up recently in a few ways, but I think that it's really important to consider that aspect of it, just given that this is our home and we know that that's a concern.
Thank you. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Peter Blum. I'm from Lee. I'm on the planning board in Lee, and I'm also on the town advisory, PCB advisory committee. I want to thank GE and EPA for responding what I think is so well to the earlier complaints that we made at the Lee High School and Junior High School auditorium about the lack of rail transport. I think you've responded very well to that. I know that I and a lot of other people have had a lot of concerns about truck transport, both in terms of just disruption of daily life, harm to the roads, and also the possibility of leaving behind contaminated sediments on the roads or in the air. And I was very pleased to see that your plan includes those liners for the trucks to prevent liquids dripping out of the trucks onto the roads that would be potentially contaminated, and also covers that would prevent anything from any dust from blowing off the top of that sediment as the truck travels down the road. I think that's an excellent decision that you made. My question for you is in relation to the dewatering process. So I'm following up on Mr. Matthews' question a little bit. So he mentioned a figure in the billions of yards of water that are going to be consumed, assuming he was concerned about where it's going to come from, the aquifer or the river. I'm concerned about what happens after it's dewatered. So let's use the word effluent to describe what comes out of the dewatering plant. Are there any contamination standards for that effluent? And then the second related question is, what should we expect in the river as this dewatering process is underway and returning this water to the river? Will it be turbid water that likely has PCB contamination? Will it affect fishing? Will it affect swimming? Will it affect, I mean, just, can you give us, I know that this is a transportation plan, but you've got a lot more water coming out of the river and going back into the river than you had previously, so I'd like you to address it if anybody here can. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Overview on the treatment, sure, yeah. Yeah, I can give you a brief overview on the water treatment of the dewatering material. So yeah, at the UDF, there'll be a treatment facility to deal with the water that's encountered during the hydraulic dredging. That facility will treat the water to standards that EPA dictates, and it will meet water quality standards. It'll be discharged back to the river. So, it should not be turbid. It should not have any problems like that.
Yeah, so to follow up, if not directly, but part of your question, so a lot of the dredging initially will be in Woods Pond, so not the, I guess still the flowing channel, so that should have a reservoir of water and, you know, hopefully won't get pumped dry. The other stretches of the river might be more challenging in dry weather, that's true. As far as turbidity, there's two things that are going, there's two similar but related one. The discharge of the water from the treatment plant will have very low effluent limits and will have very low solids, probably won't have any solids coming out of it. However, I want to be clear, because I did this for 7 years in Pittsfield for the first 2 miles. Dredging the river, digging the river in Reach 5A is probably going to cause some turbidity in the very local area. There's just no way around that. There's going to be a short-term little bit of migration of the sediment. So I just don't want to misrepresent that the only change in the river that people will see will be the effluent coming out of the treatment plant. So 5A is tricky. It's shallow. It's too shallow to dredge. It's almost too deep for other things. So that's going to be a tough one, but there's going to be engineering controls, maybe cofferdams or other methods that we're still working on. That's one of the work plans we're working on. So I just want to put that out there. Dredging Woods Pond, you know, it's going to stir up a little bit of silt while they're dredging also. Nothing to do with the effluent from the treatment plant. So I just want to be clear, and GE will have upstream and downstream water quality monitoring requirements and mitigation measures. But yeah, there's going to be some impacts, but we did it for very high contaminated levels in Pittsfield, and it was pretty localized.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
Hi, I'm Valerie Anderson. I live in Pittsfield. On Reach 5A in Pittsfield, I might have missed it, and Dean, you just talked about it. So they're not going to dredge in Reach 5A or what? And where is that going to be dewatered? The Pittsfields?
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, 5A is not proposed to be hydraulically dredged, right? And so sediment would be removed mechanically, brought to the edge of the river, dewatered, and once it's suitable for transportation, then moved to wherever it's going.
So where will it be dewatered?
At one of the staging areas that's listed on the figure. So the water will be treated at that location.
So it'll be trucked down, like from Pomeroy Avenue, it'll be trucked down to Utility Drive?
Yes.
Okay, so there'll be quite a few trucks going down Pomeroy and Holmes Road.
Holmes Road and Utility Drive.
Okay, to be dewatered there.
Not dewatered, no.
No.
So it'll be dewatered at the staging areas. So on the map here, and I can probably show you easier. If you see the red boxes, those are what's called the staging areas, where we're actually removing the material from the river, bringing it to a staging area, and then getting it dewatered and prepared for transportation. Once it's ready, we'll follow one of the yellow routes to get from the staging area out to a main road. Once we're on the main road, then we can drive to Utility Drive.
Okay, so the staging areas, how long will the material be left there? In piles, I guess, huh?
It's going to be variable depending on how fast we produce it and how fast it's dewatered. Yep.
Okay, because I'm concerned about air monitoring at those staging areas, because I have learned that the worst place for air in PCBs is when mud is drying. So if there's going to be big piles of mud drying there, that's going to be really critical that you put air monitors at every single staging area. Is that going to happen?
All of those types of questions will be addressed in the REACH specific documents, so they're not in the T&D plan. So I don't know if that answers
And
your
when will that be out?
Reach 5A final.
Josh?
Oh,
So, hi, Josh Fontaine with EPA, one of the RPMs for the site. EPA today issued their conditional approval letter of the most recent draft of the Reach 5A document. That included approximately 168 conditions that GE has to go back and revise the document. So that's still a process. The exact locations of air monitoring and all of that is still up for discussion.
Okay, and is that part of the January 15th deadline for public comments?
No, that input period was a while ago. That document came out in 2023 timeframe, and we issued the CAL either today or yesterday.
Because it's hard to comment on something that hasn't been decided yet. So I would request that you take public comments on this at least until January 15th because it's not out yet.
The document has been out, and we did receive public comment on it. EPA just released our conditional approval letter of it, requiring GE to go back and revise that document. When that document is submitted and as final, that will also be open for public input.
Oh, okay, so it will later.
Yes.
Okay, good, because I really want to add that there should be air monitoring everywhere that you handle material, especially at each of those staging areas, because that's the worst for volatilization of PCBs into the air. Also, I would ask that the air monitors have a turnaround time of not 2 weeks like we've had in Pittsfield, but 24 hours. It is possible for air monitors to have a turnaround time of 24 hours. They've done it on the Hudson. It's more expensive, but the residents deserve to know if there's exceedance of safe levels within 24 to 48 hours. Also, the trucks you say are going to have liners. Well, how does a dump truck get a liner? Because I just remember seeing during the first 2 miles of the cleanup, driving behind a dump truck that came out of the Elm Street area with dripping water and sediment out the back, dripping onto Elm Street as I followed it. So how are you going to prevent that? A dump truck has to dump, so how are you going to have a liner?
Sure. The containers that I showed in the pictures we have in the transportation disposal plan, all of those transport methods, the intermodals plus the dump trucks, they all will be fitted with a preformed plastic liner. It's like a, polyethylene sheeting material. It's preformed for the size of the container. And so when the truck gets to where it's going and it needs to dump, the liner and the material all come out together.
Okay.
And then a new liner is installed for the next trip.
Good, because they didn't do a good job of that on the first cleanup. Okay, and I also really encourage a really strict standard for turbidity if you're going to be doing all of this vacuuming or whatever you call it. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Gail Ceresia, Lee, Mass. I had a question. You were talking about there was going to be one truck that didn't have sediment in it, and I really was confused by that statement in Reach 5A. You said all the trucks were going to have sediment in it, but there was one truck that was not going to. So what is it going to
Maybe it was Reach 6.
I don't know.
Woods Pond has a very small amount of soil that needs to be removed, and that won't be pumped hydraulically. So therefore, that'll go by truck to the UDF, and it's one truckload. If that's the one, if it's
I don't know,
that,
it's just
that
the way you said
parenthetical.
it. It was like, all the trucks will have sediment except for one. And I'm like, what? I didn't know what you meant by that. So that's what you were talking about?
If it's the first bullet there, yeah, if it's the first bullet, I was probably referring to the limited amount of soil that needs to be removed from Reach 6 Woods Pond area. And that limited amount of soil equates to one truckload.
Okay. All right. Now here's another thing I wanted to ask you about because I was reading the proposal. And so some of the literature was saying that the railroad came out with you guys. And of course, no one here, maybe some people here got to go with you, GE and the railroad people. I don't know. But you, in your literature, said that the railroad guy said that was a good spot to put a spur. I think it was north of New Lenox Road or somewhere that would service 5A and B. And you guys decided that wasn't a good idea because now you had to go through a bunch of permitting and the ACEC and all this other stuff. And I find that kind of, what did the lawyer say? Intellectually dishonest is the word he used, because you guys have been doing all kinds of studies, and I've mentioned several times that you didn't do a habitat study until you let Eversource, the nearby neighbors around the GE site, Eversource right away went right through the PCB proposed site for the dump, and then the new neighbors were able to move soil in an area that DEP had regulated before, and it was under water conditions that they couldn't do that. So I just find that, you know, you are selecting sites to do the staging for the trucking because it's good for truck business, and that's what you want to do because that's how you can justify this dump. And so I find that a little bit difficult to understand. What exactly, I mean, did the railroad guy only say there was one place that you could possibly put a siding or a spur between New Lenox Road and the confluence? That's the big question for me, because we don't get to talk to the railroad and GE and EPA. You guys all talk about things, you know, together. And I would like some clarification, because you did write something in your proposal about why you didn't select it. And I also noticed that you never mentioned what the impacts to the ACEC would be when you widen Roaring Brook Road for these trucks. There's going to be a lot of impacts there, and that's not even being considered, as far as I can see. You just went ahead and plowed over the dump site, let people do whatever they wanted, whatever corporation they wanted to do, and now you're claiming, oh, it's in the ACEC. We have to be careful of it because we want the dump and we want trucks. I'm sorry if I'm being a little sarcastic, but I really would like to know. I haven't been privy to these conversations with GE and the railroad, but you did mention that there was something, and then you were like saying, well, we wouldn't be able to get enough property, but doesn't the state own land north of New Lenox Road? Doesn't GE own land north of New Lenox Road that could be near the, maybe I'm on the wrong side of the river, but it seems to me there could be a staging area there, and it's not far from the railroad. I mean, New Lenox Road, that's a short distance to the railroad if you decided to do something there. I think you should really look at the possibility of putting some sidings. And I don't know what else the railroad's saying to you guys, because, you know, maybe the selectmen know, I don't know. Maybe they do. But, you know, obviously I'm not going to know because I'm just a person that lives in town. is going to be impacted by this. And I do find it a little bit disconcerting that EPA is considering, oh, well, we should only ship the highest contaminants out of town to a dump site. There's no reason to do the lower levels when I don't even see how you can even determine whether you got high levels or low levels the way you're going about this business. It takes 2 weeks for you to get a result of how many PCBs are in the area. And not only that, I don't really see you figuring you're going to take 1 to 2 feet off. To me, if the PCBs were dumped from 1930 to the 70s or 80s, whatever they stopped, that there's a lot of sediment that could be on top of those PCBs. And if you take 1 to 2 feet, voila, now we have more PCBs going down the river. You know, and I don't see how that even makes sense. And also, if I spilled milk on the floor and my mother told me to pick it up and I took 20%, you know what she would do? She would laugh at me. She would totally laugh at me. And this whole project is silly. The whole project. You should be working on a resolution, a solution. And it should be something that's going to decommission these PCBs. And I applaud EPA for the contest. But this is what EPA should be striving for. Not this silly dump and dredge and pick up 20% of the milk. Thank you.
Thank you. Denny? Introduce yourself. Oh. I am so sorry.
Sure. Yeah, I could try to answer part of what you asked. So, yeah, so GE retained a railroad expert to help us evaluate the railroad, the available properties, the mills, and all that stuff. The site you're probably referring to is the Utility Drive rail spur that is on state property. And that's the area that GE and our consultant determined to be the most feasible for the project based on where materials coming out of the river were on the right side of the river versus the opposite side, et cetera. So it wasn't a willy-nilly evaluation. You know, we had experts helping us.
But you could avoid the trucking if you put it on the, east side or the west side of the river.
But yeah.
Look at it. You're in the ACEC, so it doesn't matter. If you're destroying Morningbrook Road, that's going to be so wide, you're going to have to, there's going to be a lot of impacts there. You've already impacted the base of October Mountain, you know, and to claim that it's a problem because it's in the ACEC, to me is laughable. It's just like, come on, what do you think we are? Stupid? I don't know.
Not at all. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Denny Alsop, Stockbridge. As we all know, Asheville happened, Leominster happened, Montpelier happened, Libya happened, Spain happened. The ocean is warming up. There's more energy, and that it's carrying more moisture, and it's changed our weather here in Berkshire County as well as regionally. We've seen that the expert at NECASC over there at the climate resilience people over there at UMass have said that we're going to be getting these periods of drought followed by intense rain, and we're going to be getting the same amount of rain rising slowly because of climate change. It's just going to come, in these bigger events, and that's what we're seeing. And So my question is, given that this is the new reality here in our towns and region, climate resilience, that part of the cleanup has been, to my best appreciation and what I read, it's going to be dealt with reach by reach, and but the river itself is a system as a whole. And has the region given thought to actually assessing the vulnerability, rating the vulnerability of each reach on its own? And is that actually possibly more important a consideration than the idea of starting at the top and working down to avoid recontamination, as Dean mentioned earlier, and which I might admit I supported earlier, but this new climate thing is making me thinking that maybe we should be looking at whether certain stretches of the river, particularly, say, the meanders in 5A and B and C, might be more susceptible to, the release of vast amounts of material. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go here and then you.
Hi, Michelle Leiden. I live in Pittsfield. I'm a big fan of clean water. I just want to clarify that the main difference between this plan and the previous plan is that there's more hydraulics involved and less trucking. Do I have that correct?
More hydraulic and more use of railroads.
More use of railroads. And does the increased amount of hydraulics, does that mean more feet of piping? Or is it essentially more of those dredging gizmos that you showed us pictures of?
I guess, if I understand your question, maybe a little bit of both. So the first iteration of the transportation plan assumed, I think it was just over 50% of the project material could be hydraulically dredged. And that was based on those evaluations of the reaches at that time. And then we looked more closely at each reach and determined more material from each reach, except for 5A, could be hydraulically dredged. So I guess the end result would be more dredging equipment, ultimately. Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't, the amount of distance that the sediment travels by pipe, that's not very different from before?
Yeah, right, it is, yeah.
It is different?
Correct.
So there's more feet of piping?
That's right.
And what would you anticipate would be the way to monitor like leakage from the increased lengths of pipe? And where does that pipe travel? Does that travel through residential areas?
Sure, the routes haven't been identified precisely where the pipes will go. There's a small evaluation in the T&D plan about hydraulic dredging, and I believe it talks briefly about the mitigation measures to how the dredging will happen, how the pumps will work and the piping system will work. I guess the short answer is many times the dredging pipes are double-walled, double-contained. So if there were a leak, it would be contained in an outer pipe. That's one of the mitigation measures.
Okay. So we're not too worried about the seams yet?
No.
We're not worried about the seams yet. Okay. And can you also clarify for us or expound on, so there's a limit on how much hydraulics can be used. Can you explain what sets the limit for, is it how many feet
sure.
the hydraulics is effective?
Yeah.
Or is it cost?
The evaluation on whether portions of the reach can be hydraulically dredged involves looking at the material in the reach, so like the grain size, whether it's cobbly, stone, sand, and also distance. How far, when we remove it from the river, how far does it then need to be pumped to get to where it's going? And there's a limit to how far you can realistically pump things.
Just because you lose hydraulic effect after a certain distance?
Yeah, you just have to add more booster stations every so many feet, and it just becomes a logistical problem to manage so many of those.
So more piping would not result in even less trucking?
I don't think so. I think more hydraulic removal will result in less trucking. Okay. I don't know if that answers your question.
I'll just keep this quick. Just coming off the butternut fire that happened in Great Barrington, 1,600 acres burned. Can we talk a little bit about emergency planning for possible, hopefully, derailment or hazmat preparations? And I know we've had a few folks raise concerns that have their homes close to the railway. Thank you.
Sure. There will be emergency plans in place for both trucking, rail transport, hydraulic transport, and those plans will be very detailed, and they'll be town specific to make sure the right stakeholders are involved with local responders and whatnot. But the short answer is, if there's an incident in town, trucks are moving through streets, GE is here, the response contractor is here, we'll be working with the local officials to deal with any incidents. If you're talking about trucks that leave the area, out-of-state trucking or out-of-state rail, the response to emergencies is typically handled by the transporter. It'll be a 911 call. The transporter will be the one to identify the emergency usually, and then local responders, wherever that incident is occurring, will deal with it. We certainly plan to coordinate with the local police and fire departments to help with their understanding of the work that we're doing, sure. Yep.
Thank you.
They'll have to be part of our emergency response plan, short answer.
Thanks for your patience.
Hi, I'm Maureen Quigley. A question for you. Is there an epidemiologist on the team?
No.
Can I ask why not?
Strictly for the transportation and disposal plan, no, we don't.
For the whole overall project, there's not an epidemiologist?
If you're asking about risk to contamination and stuff like that, I think that's a question for EPA.
Okay.
What's the question?
If there's an epidemiologist on your team involved in the work that you're doing. No. So, someone in the medical field, I find that appalling, absolutely appalling. Epidemiologists are public health workers who investigate patterns and causes of disease and injury. They seek to reduce the risk and occurrence of negative health outcomes through research, community education, and health policy. You are removing PCBs from a river and placing them in a concealed container, whatever you're calling it, in very close proximity to the river. I can't comprehend how that's even a possible plan to put contaminants right next to where you're removing them. And what is the backup plan for contamination of drinking water, considering the other gentleman mentioned about the aquifer? Right now in Housatonic, we have dealt with years and years and years of contaminated water without any positive results from town officials or anyone. I strongly urge you to have an epidemiologist on your team And if you do not, I have no faith in the EPA and what you are doing with this project.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? Of course.
Thank you. I'm Bob Jones. I'm on the select board in the town of Lee, and I'm also chairing the PCB advisory committee. I think it's absolutely great that we've come as far as we have in 1 year's time. A year ago, we stood in the auditorium at Lee High School, and we were told by GE that they had looked into the railroad, and it was just not viable. We knew, of course, that it is viable because we had spoken with Parker Rodriguez, chief counsel for the Housatonic Railroad, and he told us that GE had never even reached out to the railroad. A year later, clearly they have, and we've come up with a plan that utilizes rail, which makes sense. It made sense to all of us years ago. So finally we have a plan where we're reducing trucks, we're employing the rail. By the way, the Housatonic Railroad, my understanding is that they can have their operation up and running in about a year's time. 1 year. The question I have, the main question I have, it's wonderful that there's so much detail in this plan, the minutia, the fine points, the routes, where we're going to pump, what's going on to trucks, what's going on to trains. The question I have is, based upon the last meeting we had at the Lee High School, when we talked about volatilization of the PCBs. The highest concentrations are, of course, behind the dams and in the oxbows. The dams are located next to the factories, and the sidings for the railroad are next to the dams and the factories. So there does have to be upgrades, but the rail absolutely should be the focus for transporting this stuff. Now, in terms of transportation, what I'm not understanding, given that last meeting at Lee High School, we were told that if we wanted to swim in the Housatonic River, we'd be okay, as long as we don't touch the sediment, because the PCB is attached to the sediments. We're told it's okay to kayak and canoe on the river, perfectly safe. For 4.5 years, I've been worried about volatilization, but we found out at that meeting that we shouldn't be worried about the volatilization. We found out that you can fish in the Housatonic River, and it's absolutely fine, perfectly safe, as long as you don't eat the fish. So I guess in terms of transportation, I can understand why we would want to take out the high-level toxic material that's built up behind the dams and in those few oxbows. I can understand that completely. And I can see putting them on rail cars and taking them out of the area to pre-existing dumps in other parts of the country that we've already paid for. We've already paid for them. They exist. We're not putting this stuff on Main Street in Bedford Falls in some quaint little town. These are pre-existing dump sites. Okay, so I think that they should be utilized as much as possible. But the main thing is, if we're going to be using the railroad, if we're going to be dredging these high-level toxic areas behind the dams, and get them out. But if the volatility of the low-level stuff is not impacting us the way the high stuff, why are we even touching it at this point? Why are we capping it and burying it? Why are we not focusing on remediation methods that are used all around the world and in this country, just not in Region 1? Why are we not focusing on getting rid of the really poisonous stuff and then work on remediating what's in the river? Then you're not building any dumps. You're not trucking this stuff through the streets. and you're actually implementing a cleanup of the river, because the truth is, Gail's the only one who's mentioned it. Not my figures, not the town of Lee's figures. The most we're going to get out of this cleanup, it's not even a cleanup, this project is 20%. Maybe 30% of the best, but more likely around 20%. So for all of the details in a transportation plan and how we're still left with 80% in the river, and whether you cap it or not, we've talked to our consultants who know about dams and hydraulics, and they tell us that those buildups behind those dams will happen again because this stuff moves. The sediments move. So you can cap them if you want to have faith and say that cap will be there for eternity, then we're okay. We know the PCBs last forever. We're not destroying a single PCB. We're not neutralizing a single PCB. So for a transportation plan, I love it. Thank you very much that you're finally utilizing the railroad as it should have been from the very, very beginning. Remember back in 2016, all of this stuff was supposed to go out of area. All of it. And even the environmental groups, it was an imperfect plan, but even the environmental groups begrudgingly said, okay, we can deal with that. GE immediately went back to court, and now we have a planned UDF, a toxic waste dump, yet another in Berkshire County. So in terms of transportation, yes, use the railroad, take out the high-level stuff, and put our focus on remediation in the river. It's being done all around the world, and stop this plan of a dump in Lee or anywhere else in Berkshire County, and let's actually clean the river instead of just moving the stuff around and putting it on a hillside right adjacent to the river. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie? Introduce yourself, sir.
My name is Charlie Cianfarini, lifelong resident of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which we are here. I want to thank EPA for actually having a meeting in Pittsfield. It's been quite a while. Wish there was more people here, but appreciate who is here. My wife and I started Citizens for PCB Removal because of residential fill issues in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Almost 400 residences in the city were evaluated and had some form of remediation because General Electric put their crap everywhere. Not only in the river, in your neighborhoods, on your properties, everywhere. I'm also a member of the Citizens Coordination Council. I do have some questions, however, about transportation. Everybody wants to talk about we're going to use rail to get it here, and we're going to use some trucks to get it there, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. When you're using hydraulic dredging, you're sucking up what is there along the riverbanks, in the riverbed. How are you going to replace what is coming out? Don't you need to have sediment come in on trucks somehow to go there? We're going to talk, that's clean fill that we will be driving through our cities and towns. That's still going to be dirt. That's still going to be dust. That's still going to go everywhere. They will not do the same thing with those transportation trucks that they claim to do when they have PCB sediment in them. It's still going to be dirt and dust and trucks that are going through our neighborhood. Somehow you have to replace what you're taking out. So when you're going to be doing all this dredging, how are you going to replace it? What are you going to do? You're going to turn the dredge around and send clean dirt back down the pipes? That's not going to work. The other thing, and again, following Bob is really tough because I wanted to say some of the same things. my real question is, at this point, how do I start making liners for these trucks? Because if they're using one for each truck that they're gonna, and then you're gonna throw it away, you're gonna clean it, are you gonna be using the same trucks to go and get clean fill that you just had PCB sediment in? Are you gonna wash them? Are you gonna use steam to clean them before they go get that clean fill? There's a big part of this discussion that never gets brought up, and that's all the other trucks that you're gonna do. On the GE plant, there's a building where they do water cleaning under a NIPD's permit. We already know that some water that you're gonna take out of this river and you're gonna take out of that sediment is gonna end up on trucks going through Pittsfield, back to the GE plant to go through that system. Tonight was the first time that somebody said there's gonna be a dewatering facility at the UDF. I have never seen that as definitely being there. So the question is that set in stone? Because nothing else that you have ever talked about at this site has ever been set in stone. That's it for me, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. There will certainly be a dewatering and treatment facility at the UDF when hydraulic dredging is occurring. Yep. Gotta have it.
Else? I have 2 mics on. Does anybody else have any questions or? Here you go.
Beginning about 4 years ago, the very first comment period that we experienced in our town, there were 430 comments against having the dump and not one in favor. For the town of Lee, there's nothing good about the dump. It puts a bunch of GE's trash on top of a water supply, the Woods Pond Aquifer, digging out the watershed of October Mountain. But I see that you have come up with several new possibilities for railroad transportation, sidings. Have you got a plan that eliminates the dump entirely? That's the best thing for us. A dump that lasts forever on top of a water supply is not a satisfactory outcome. I haven't heard you say anything about having a satisfactory outcome. It's all focused on the dredging of the muck going to Woods Pond. Woods Pond is apparently, well, obviously a bottleneck for this whole operation. If you would eliminate that and put your effort into getting this stuff out of the area, we'd all be better off.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very similar question to Dr. Kenny. Like I said, Matt works for GE. GE did not pick the remedy. They did dispute. They did appeal the 2016 remedy. This is EPA's remedy. We believe it's the right remedy to place the material in the UDF. We've been through that. We can keep having the discussions. We did our comparative analysis. We followed the regulations, the original permit. We think it's the correct remedy. It's the right amount of material to be removed. So no, there is no plan to eliminate the UDF. As far as the 20%, that's a very misleading number. The risk that EPA is clear on, the risk, and the reason we're doing the remediation is consumption of fish is by far and away, the human health risk. Secondary risk is direct contact with floodplain soils through either ingestion or dermal absorption. You do not need to get rid of every molecule of PCBs to eliminate those risk pathways. The 20% could be, for example, I don't even know where that number came from, but is it volume? Is it mass? Is it risk? What is it? Is it PCBs 30 feet down in a floodplain that'll never see the light of day? The number means nothing. The 20% means nothing. The correct measurement is the reduction of risk. That's what the remedy is for. Is it going to be perfect? Probably not. But the metrics show that the floodplain will be mediated to areas that are protective of public health from dermal absorption and ingestion. And you only need to dig enough to do that, to meet those levels. And that the levels in fish will be dropping dramatically down. So those are the risks. You know, you can say there's stuff left behind, it's not perfect, it doesn't work great. Okay, well, you can dig a lot more, and then all the issues we talked about here get multiplied by a factor of 10. 10 times as big a dump, 10 times as much transportation, 10 times as much of everything, or 5 times if you want to use 20%. And then you need that much more backfill. So now you're ripping up mountains to backfill. We've been through the remedy. You know, we can keep talking about it, but I do have to correct a couple. I have to point out our rationale for a couple of the decisions made.
Thank you, Dean. We've got about 4 minutes left. Is there anybody else besides Gail who would like to make a statement? If you could just come up, because like I said, we've got 4 minutes left, so if you could keep your comments or your questions brief, that would be greatly appreciated.
I'll try to go real fast. I actually have some just very straightforward questions. My name is Kevin Farrar. I was recently hired by HRI to be a consultant contractor under the TAG grant program EPA manages. Yes, I can. First question, I'll try to go real fast. There's 3 reaches where there's no hydraulic transport proposed. Is it distance?
Let's see, 5A is distance and material grain size. 7E is distance. Is there another one, Mark?
I thought it was 5B, 5C, and 6.
5A, 5B, and 7E. Yep.
Okay. Second thing, has the decision been finalized to use hydraulic dredging as opposed to mechanical for all the reaches, or that those decisions have not yet been finalized?
No, not finalized, right? For 5A, the only work plans submitted conceptually are 5A and 6. And I don't think, so we don't have final work plans.
Not at that point in the decision
Correct.
tree. Okay, next one is if you have to go mechanical, are you still have the option to do hydraulic conveying to where you want to go?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you make up water will be out of the river anyway.
Yeah, we're kind of venturing into the hypothetical world, so I don't want to say for sure, but.
In commenting on the transportation plan, if your plan is to do hydraulic conveyance, I think my question is pertinent at this point in the process.
Sure.
So Matt, I think what he's getting at is you're talking about hydraulic conveyance of the material, whether it gets mechanically bucketed into a dredge, whether it gets screw auger or whatever it is. The plan is to hydraulically pump it. How it gets into the hydraulic pumps might be what you're asking, and I don't think those. I don't think those decisions have been made.
Right. So you don't need the answer on hydraulic versus mechanical dredging in order to finalize your T&D plan.
Yeah, the final methods will be laid out in the final work plans.
Okay. Next thing, do you guys have resuspension standards set yet for the various elements of the project?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
You don't think so? Okay, and then let's see, what was the last one? I'm trying to go fast. When you're planning to do hydraulic transportation conveyance, what is the anticipated flow rate, ballpark, versus the ballpark summertime low flow rate in the Housatonic River?
Don't know off the top of my head. Don't know if maybe Mark can.
So the hydraulic flow rate for the hydraulic dredging is 1,000 to 1,500 GPM probably, right? The flow rate in the Housatonic River in the summertime, average flow rate's 440 CFS up at Colesville. It's higher downstream. We don't have a gauging station down there, but it's gonna be higher than that. So roughly, 400 CFS is gonna be like 3,000 gallons per second versus so the flow in the river is 3,000 gallons per second, and we're at 1,000 gallons per minute for the orders of magnitude less than what the rivers will never affect the river, volume at those rates.
I didn't understand any of that. Gail, did you have one more comment? Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question or make a comment tonight?
I'll be quick.
Okay.
My follow-up question is for Dean. Can you tell me, did they do a comparative analysis with the 2016 permit that was appealed by GE?
Yes, and that's well documented and actually was opposed by a lot of the environmental groups who also didn't think that had enough remediation. There's more remediation in the 2020 permit. But yeah, there was a full comparative analysis, inches thick, response to comments. That's correct.
Okay, so then after GE appealed, they didn't want to do rail. You did another comparative analysis?
They didn't really appeal anything about rail. They appealed the entire permit. They appealed every ounce of material that we directed them to remove in the permit. They appealed the on-site disposal versus off-site. They basically appealed every element of the permit. And the
So then
EAB,
you had to do it. You had to do another comparative analysis?
Then we did a second comparative analysis, that's correct.
Because they appealed.
We did not prevail fully at the Environmental Appeals Board. The remedy, except for the disposal, was upheld, so it was remanded back to EPA. When EPA selected a different remedy, alternate remedy, then we did do another, we did another comparative analysis, put it out for full public comment, did a response to comments, made the final remedy, and then that was also appealed to what's called the Environmental Appeals Court and then federal court. So it was defended with the comparative analysis in 2020, response to comments, and 2 court hearings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here tonight. I'd like to remind you about the sheets outside the door that not only list all the documents that are open for public comment right now, but a handful that are in the pipeline and will be coming up, as well as the contact information for your new community involvement coordinator, Lauren Draper. And my contact number is, information is on there too. If you have any other questions and I can help you out, let me know. Thanks for coming.